Erev Tov, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see some familiar faces from last week, some faces I haven't seen before. And it's just nice to be able to study together. So, as a disclaimer from last week, there's no continuum from one class to the next. So if you can't make a class, don't worry. We're choosing entirely different subjects each and every week. I've tried to be a little creative during the teaching sessions and find things that are not esoteric and things that people can relate to. With that in mind, we're going to be speaking about clothing tonight. And all different commentaries about what the Torah, the rabbis have to say, different comments, stories about it in regard to clothing, modest dress, appropriate dress, things of that nature. So the Hebrew word for clothing is beged, is a singular, and begadim in modern day Hebrew are clothes, plural. So we don't know, you'll find as I'm teaching these classes, I always go to the origin. And the origin is always in Genesis. You got to go right to the story of Genesis.
In the beginning.
In the very beginning, right? And so after the original sin, where Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden fruit, we discussed it last week, if you remember. At the time, they really weren't wearing clothes. And as soon as they ate, there became an awareness that they weren't wearing clothes. And right away, they looked to find clothes. So they tell us in the Talmud that they used clothes from the fig tree. They took the leaves and they draped themselves in the figs. Now, there's a commentary, which is a fascinating commentary I saw, in that they wanted some help from the trees in the garden to clothe themselves, and none of the trees wanted to participate. So the only tree that was willing to participate was the tree that they ate from. But if you were paying attention last week, what did I tell you they ate from the tree? Which fruit?
Apple.
No, apples and misnomer. The whole premise of last week's class was
Great, right.
the vine.
Why?
So how could it be that that's the same tree that gave him a fig?
Those are vines.
So the way to correlate the story is the greatest mystic, which is from the book of the Zohar, Shifman Bar Yochai, does something really incredible. He says that one tree in the garden, the tree of knowledge, was all 7 species wrapped in one. Not a conflict. So it was vine, and it was wheat, and with all of the other species, I'm not going to tell you what they are right now, but so they got clothing from there, not actually clothing, but a covering. God basically takes them to task, as you know, immediately. And he calls out Adam and he says the very famous words, Ayeka. Essentially, where are you? Where are you in relationship to me? He knew where he was. And of course, they now understand that they did something terrible and you can't walk it back. And God has mercy upon them. And God makes them the first set of actual clothing. So we're going to start with that. So the very first set of clothing was made by God, and it had these designs of animals on. In particular, the set of clothing that he made for Adam gave him power and dominion over all creatures. Now, what happened is there was 10 generations between Adam and Noah. So eventually it worked its way down to Noah. As we know, Noah was on the ark, and that was one of the things brought on the ark. However, his son, remember we spoke a little bit about his son, which wasn't such a good guy last week, Ham, did some terrible things to his father. He stole his father's clothing and eventually gave it to the king of the time, once they're already resettled, and his name was Nimrod. Nimrod was known for his hunting, but the people didn't understand that this clothing that he wore had majestic abilities to subdue the animals. It wasn't that he was such a great marksman. Now, we know there's another great hunter, which is Jacob's twin brother, Esau. He got wind of it. And when you want something, there's a couple ways to do it. And he basically killed Nimrod and he took it. And he used it to hunt. Now, the only person that he trusted with this clothing was his mother, Rebecca. And she would keep it. Now, towards the end of Isaac's life, when he's already starting to diminish, and she understands that he's starting to feel his strength wane and is ready to bless his son. If you remember the story, his mother tells him to go in incognito, right? Go in undercover, the greatest Hollywood acting ability of Jacob ever, and pretend to be your brother. One of the ways that he pretended to be his brother was he wore the same outfit, the original one going back to the time of Adam. Now, after he convinces his father to bless him, and his father does, he hides that from his twin brother. He says there's nothing good can come from this. So to this day now, we don't even know where it is. It's kind of in Geniza, it's somewhere hidden, somewhere majestically that nobody knows where this outfit is, but that's the original clothing that was created, the first set of clothing going back to Adam and Eve. Now, in regards to forbidden mixtures of clothing, there's something very interesting in Leviticus 19:19, and that is they're forbidden to put together wool and linen. This is known for bonus point, anyone? Shatnez. Shatnez is the mixture of wool and linen, and we don't know why, other than God said so. So for the sake of this teaching, I'll give you an analogy that all of you can understand in this room. So everyone that's gone through raising children or having been a child themselves, and you give your parent a hard time, or your kids give you a hard time, and you get to the point where logic just doesn't work anymore. Finally, your kid keeps on saying, but why? But why? And then you turn around to your kid and say, and that should be enough. And so long as you're under my roof, that's what it is. So when we have these certain commandments in the Torah, it's called a chok. It's a commandment, which is a divine law. Another example of that would be kashrut. Now, there are many doctors and there's benefits that they can tell you by eating a kosher dietary lifestyle. But the bottom line is it's a divine law. God said so, so we do it. We try to the best of our abilities to come up with the reasons to understand, to make it more personal and maybe ways we can attach ourselves to certain commandments. But this commandment of shatnez is forbidden. Another example would be the red heifer. We see in the book of Numbers. When somebody became impure, they'll find the red heifer, and they'll bring it as a sacrifice, and they will take the ashes and sprinkle it upon somebody. And once you sprinkle it upon the individual, they become pure. But there's no explanation how that works, other than because God said it would. Now, there are some rabbis that did try to attempt to explain shatnez. So they came at it from try to be logical. So Maimonides, a very famous Rambam, the rabbi slash doctor, says that these mixtures were the work of idolatrous priests. They would mix fabrics. Since it says in the Torah you're not allowed to do the practices of idol worshippers, it became that's why it's in the Torah that way. Another suggestion is, this is more of a Kabbalistic idea, that when you have the mixing of forbidden species, by the way, this applies to fruits also, called climb. So you're not allowed to plant fruit, but you can eat it. And like kind of a catch, there's always a way to work around it. You're not supposed to mix breed species. But they go say this goes back to the time of Cain and Abel. So Cain brought, if you remember, each one brought a sacrifice. Cain brought flax, where linen comes from flax. And Abel brought sheep. And what comes from sheep? Wool. And what came out of that? We have the first murder in the Torah. Right? God accepted The brothers over Cain, over Abel. He accepted his brother's sacrifice, and instead of being upset with God, he decides he's going to murder his brother. And we get the famous adage when he asks him, "Where's your brother?" And he said, "What am I, my brother's?" That's where it comes from that story. So either way, the process of shatnez, it involved combing and spinning and weaving and even sewing buttons on to reinforce the pads. So it's actually a
I have
very
a question on shatnez.
Yes, sir.
What I was taught way back when was shatnez was derived from the clothing of the high priest, that only the high priest mixed wool and linen. Is that true or not?
Yes, that is true. That, and you jumped ahead of me, but yes, that's a good catch, Bob, but yes, that is
I
true.
mean, I can't stand.
There was a special exception made for the high priest and only the high priest. Nobody else, okay? So going back to the process. So we have somebody that does it in town. He's a rabbi over on Taylor Road. There's a Judaic store called Grand Judaica. His name is Rabbi Heinemann. And it's a very painful process. So picture this. You go and you buy a new suit, spend a lot of money, and the first thing you got to do is got to check the shatnez. So what he would do is he'll take the lapel, he'll flip up your collar, and he cuts it. He tears into it, and it's got chemicals, or some people will outsource to different labs. They can see that there's a tendency, if there's shatnez in the suit, it's going to make its way around. Most of the time, it's not there. However, he doesn't sew it back up for you.
Oh.
So you got a torn collar underneath, but there's a provision, and you're not allowed to wear shatnez. So they do check it, or they're outsourced. And
That's what he's saying.
now, in regards to shatnez, you can take a garment that is wool and a separate garment that's linen and put one on top of the other. That's not considered shatnez. Shatnez is when the two of them are combined in the same garment.
Because that's why the Orthodox shirts.
Okay, now, one of the areas of clothing which really are fascinating, when I was thinking about this, where we can all unfortunately have to relate to this, is unfortunately when somebody passes and you get ready to start the Shiva. One of the first things we do is we do Kriya. We take the garment. I think, Bob, you're unmuted, Bob. We're hearing some feedback there. So we take the garment, the rabbi will take a razor. Here we do it a little bit in a nicer way. At the funeral home, they'll give you a ribbon.
Yeah.
But if you want to take a really, by the letter of the law, you're supposed to tell your garment that you're wearing. And not the most pleasant, you wear the same garment for 7 days of Shiva. Right? Not the, if you're on the cleanliness scope of things, but they'll tear it. Now the tear in the garment, as you know, is supposed to indicate that you have a tear in your heart. You've lost somebody near and dear to you. And essentially, this is part of the Shiva process. Now, when the body is put in the casket, it has its own unique clothing. The clothing is put in white linen, and that's called tachrichin, shrouds. I would call it shrouds, just as a very loose interpretation. So in the Torah, we see that Yaakov was one of the first ones to do Kriya. So if you remember the story with Joseph, when Joseph is out looking for his brothers, they find him. It's a good time to get rid of him. And we'll speak about his garment in a moment. Jacob makes him the very famous Technicolor coat. And he doesn't make it for any of the other brothers. Matter of fact, the commentaries say that he also made him the coat with very long sleeves to show that this son doesn't have to do labor. That's okay, the rest of you can work. And the brothers took it personal. So you can see a parallel with Cain and Abel. Instead of taking it out on the father, or basically Adam, in regards to put the blame where it ought to be, they take it out on the brother. Now, he didn't help himself because he was a tattletale. He had told him about the dreams, he was demeaning them. But we do see that when they want to fool their father, they take his technicolor coat, they dip it in goat's blood, and they send it back home. And basically, do you recognize this? Of course he recognizes, they gave it to him. But the blood, obviously connects the dots. And the first thing he does is he tears Creel. He tears his garments immediately. Now, the Zohar, the mystic commentaries, gives a little bit of a suggestion in terms of the tearing, that when the soul leaves the body, that's to be a separation. So the body itself is like a form of clothing, if you will, for the soul. So if you think about it in a mystical kind of way, this is all outer. This is why we say the soul of eternity, and the body obviously decomposes. So the soul itself is covered by, if you will, our extremities and our skin and everything is some kind of a covering. So once the soul leaves, that's separating itself altogether from the clothing. Now, let's talk a little bit about this custom of tachrifin. So these tachrifin are made from it's a white linen, and they're used, as we said. Now, this custom goes back 2 millennia. So in the time of Rabbi Gamliel in the Talmud, what ended up happening in the Talmud was that they would recommend that people buy extremely expensive linen. And it got to the point where people were very poor, they don't want to be embarrassed, they were very stressed. So you can imagine that bad enough that you've lost somebody, now you're worrying, how can I afford to? Yeah. So what a terrible thing started to happen, that just left the bodies without burial. Without a burial, because they don't want to be embarrassed. Rabbi Gamliel saw what was going on, and he made a public pronouncement. So when my time comes, give me the simplest linen possible. That took the pressure off the entire generation, because the greatest sage was willing to be buried in very simple white linen. And that carried over and became a viable option for everyone of that generation. The Talmud states that upon reincarnation, the person is going to arise from the grave wearing a shroud. Now, by the way, reincarnation, we believe, will take place first in Israel and then in the diaspora. So that's why many people opt to be buried in Israel, even though they lived the entire life all the way through the diaspora. So the commentary it's a cute commentary. They want to know how is the reincarnation going to work exactly? How are they going to get to there? Are they going to go United? Are they American Airlines? So they say there's going to be these tunnels that are forming all the way underground, and the bones are going to roll all the way through until they get to the land of Israel, and then they'll be reincarnated. But those that are buried there first and foremost will be the first ones to be reincarnated because of the holiness of the land. Now, there are some people that take exception to that because that's kind of if you will, almost like you're gaming the system. If it was so wonderful to live here, you should have moved there like not in your retirement years ago. You should have moved there, but even in your retirement, it's okay. You're leaving it for the last minute. But that being said, there's a merit to be buried there. And my parents should be good and well. They have plots in Israel. So when the time comes, I've got a whole plan to make local calls, and somebody's going to meet me there. We meet somebody in the airport, and you go straight to the cemetery and out for burial. Yes, sir.
So the custom that you're taking soil that's from Israel.
Yeah.
And you're putting it onto the casket.
Yes, sir.
Is that sort of like
It's kind of like giving you a quasi, like you're getting some of the burial from the land of Israel, but when you're really realistic, it's not the same, right? So there is a custom. What Bruce mentioned is a custom to take some of the earth from Israel. When I was at Cantor in Florida, we used to do funerals, they would always have a little bag. And I'd flip it and use the earth and then put in a little mixture. So you can say that you're being buried with some components. But by far and large, the meritorious to be buried in the land of Israel, so you can see reincarnation. Yes, Yosef.
Yes, we can.
I just want to be clear. Can everybody hear on Zoom when the questions are being asked? Because I'll repeat them. Yes? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Yosef.
The tradition of Shiva, 7 days mourning,
Yes, sir.
that comes also from Jacob, because he was excessively mourning Joseph.
Jacob actually, we see says the number 7 is a number of different other places because we see that with Abraham already. It says Vayakam al pnei meto, that he got up from his dead, which what does it mean he got up? He got up to the Shiva. However, he does it in the reverse order. He first mourns her, and then he buries her when he gets into where he knows where to buy the land, which is in Hebron, Marat Machpelah. Now in Israel, as you know, there's such a premium about doing the burial immediately. They even have like night lights. And they'll do funerals at night. So there's a commandment to bury immediately. Sometimes it's painful, even a head of family coming from the diaspora, they miss a funeral sometimes. They make it there for the Shiva process, but not for the actual burial. Here, we're a little bit more compassionate. I remember we did a funeral many, many years ago. And I'm sure I'll say just where the kids are from, you know who the congregant is, but I won't mention it by name, but he had one kid in South Korea and one kid in Guam. And the mother passed. And we had to wait almost 5-6 days. It's more of a compassionate, to allow the people to grieve properly and be part of a burial. But that being said, the white, the tafrichin, is so the white is always emblematic of something that is pure. Which is why you'll note during Rosh Hashanah, not just the rabbi and the cantor wear a white robe, you'll note even some congregants are wearing what's called a kittel. White is a sign of purity. White is also the sign of following how the angels, a couple that Ezekiel and Daniel told us that's how the angels look in white. The white is a sign of purity, and therefore we do this on tafrichin, to kind of give the individual his best foot forward, if you will. We're hoping that we're told in that death is a kapara, an atonement in itself. When a person dies in a way, that's his an atonement, especially if somebody didn't live their full amount of years. If somebody, and by that I'm just going to use a very loose example because I don't know what a person's full amount of years is, but we can go by years of longevity. Whatever the studies show for a male and a female, or somebody doesn't live quality years, but clearly if somebody dies in his teen years or as a child or well before they get to live a full span of years, the death itself is a penitence and allows a person to kind of go right into the Garden of Eden, so to speak. Now the kittel, by the way, is also worn. Some people wear it on Passover night.
Right.
And you'll note there's even a custom at some weddings where the groom will wear a kittel. And the reason for that is prior to the wedding, if they have an afternoon wedding, sometimes we have a morning wedding. So what I'm about to say doesn't apply. But when you have an afternoon or early evening, the groom does mincha of Erev Yom Kippur. He's supposed to do the Erev Yom Kippur mincha service, just him. Because this is like a whole new beginning when two become one. Husband and wife, you get to, all your sins are erased, and therefore he wears a kittel under the chuppah. Now we have all different kind of customs, and even the groom sometimes, the bride sometimes doesn't wear a white dress anymore, sometimes, you know, so depending on the weddings you go to, but our sins are considered like crimson, like a stain, if you will. And when we wear the white, it turns it over, the analogy to like white as snow. So the tachrichin is very meritorious. Just on that note, there's a story told of, the very famous Rothschild family. You know, the Rothschilds were very well-to-do people, and he owned a very big business. And somebody that was near his boss's office would notice every day at the same time he'd disappear. And it started to bother him, like, where's this guy going? It's like clockwork, exactly at the same time. I mean, is he going out on the ledge eating a sandwich? What's he doing? So he follows him. And lo and behold, he goes to the cemetery. And there's a grave dug there. And he gets into the grave. And he cries every day at the same time. And he understood very well about how life is, the mortality of life. And that was a reminder to him that every day is drawing closer to his death. But he used it as a positive note, which is, I shouldn't waste my time. And the best way for him that he could do is actually be amongst their people in the cemetery. I'm not saying it's for everyone, but he was on a different level. He was on a different level entirely. And I'm not saying that somebody should live their life out of the cemetery. That would be a little bit morbid.
I would say so.
Now, on the optimistic side of things, it's customary on all holidays. If you can, it's a little bit expensive, but if you can buy some new clothing,
I can do that.
you can.
It's sacrifice, but I do it.
Saying that you have to go off the chart, but when you buy something new, as in new clothing, there was a special blessing for that, which is.
Yeah.
Anyone? Yeah, no, but we're talking about something that's significant clothing. I'm not talking about a new pair of socks or undergarment.
Saying a dress or a coat.
What's that?
Saying a dress, a coat.
Yes, that's right. So, a nice tie, something like that, or even some people, let's say, get a talit or a nice kippah. It's an opportunity to make a shechianu. Now, those of you, this is a plug, and I'll say this respectfully, I don't have skin in the game here anymore, so. At 7:15, if you were to come, and you see Michael and Kenny and Brian and a few others that are around, and Ruth and a few others around this table, and Norm, or used to be, here. The first 15 blessings, which are known as Birkat HaShachar, the morning blessing, one of the blessings is specifically about clothing. Anyone?
Malbish Arumim?
That's very good. Malbish Arumim, you clothe the naked. So we don't take it for granted that we should be able to clothe ourselves. Obviously, if anything, I was just in Syracuse with my daughter this past weekend, packing her up, and I was just at the sheer volume of her clothes. I said, you got enough for the entire 4th floor here. And everyone else dressed told me, I don't know how I'm gonna pack up my car. It's the same thing. So if anything, most of us have
More than.
clothing in excess. So we shouldn't take it for granted that that clothing and being able to clothe and even donating clothes to other people that don't have, only have 1 or 2 outfits, it's not a given. Now, we're told that when the Jews left Egypt, 3 things they really kept when they were still in Egypt, even being amongst the Egyptians. One is they didn't change the name, the biblical name. So I don't attempt to know what the biblical names are back then, but they didn't. They kept the name as the Jewish name, as they were named at the Brits, and the woman at the baby naming, they kept the name. Number 2, they didn't change the language. They still spoke in Lashon HaKodesh, which is Hebrew. And the 3rd thing that didn't change was
Your clothes.
their clothes. So it's very interesting in that they really stuck to those 3 things. Unfortunately, they did many other things.
What about the bank account?
What's that?
The bank account.
The bank account? Well, whatever your legal name is,
But it says that their clothes stayed good, in good shape.
correct. The clothes did stay. The clothes did stay in very good shape. Now, I want to present an idea to you, and I may ruffle some feathers, so I'm sorry. I got a pun intended, very good. So there's this idea now that we try to get people to synagogue in any way, shape, or form we can, because we have to. Generationally, it's a battle. So Shabbat is supposed to be a day of rest. And you're supposed to pull back from the other 6 days of the week, the intensity, the workload, decompress, unplug. But somehow, way, shape, or form, within that factoring, Shabbat is becoming casual. And that is, as even some synagogues, I know there was a thought, we did it here once or twice, casual Shabbat. And I want to tell you, there's nothing casual about Shabbat. Shabbat is a day that's imbued with holiness. It's imbued with the greatest gift that God has given us. That doesn't mean you have to wear a necktie or a tie, but you can wear a white shirt or just a sport jacket. But to say that better than just to come to shul in a pair of shorts or sandals, or like you dress to go to the baseball game or the beach.
Well,
I
the
think
midriff
taking-
is open. The
What's that?
midriff is showing.
Midriff.
A few years
Midriff.
back, your midriff was bare. The bat mitzvahs with some. That's why we used to wear robes at Beth Am, because of the way the kids dress.
That's the
This
way
way-
the kids look for bar mitzvahs.
All right, so
No,
again,
I'm
so-
talking about the bat mitzvah herself.
Well, I haven't got to the modesty piece yet, so you're jumping ahead.
But we had one
Sarah?
interesting thing. We had one interesting thing. We were in New York, and the rabbi was giving a sermon. It was a small synagogue. It was an informal thing, and somebody asked her again. This was in the 80s, I think, the late 80s, and she was talking. They were talking about the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, I guess, and someone made a comment about how informal everybody is dressed in shul, and the rabbi got up and said, I can appreciate that, because before I was a rabbi, I was a banker. All week long, I dressed in those days, women dressed to look like men, with suits, with a tie. Lawyers wore, female lawyers. My daughter had a bow tie, she wore a bow, she had a matching suit to my husband's suit yet. And she said, so that when it came to Shabbos, she wanted to wear something less formal. And there was it was a good point.
I understand, I understand the point. The point I'm making is that, I can say is that, maybe that you don't have to wear something maybe as rigid as a tie, but I'm talking about a different point entirely, Sheila, where you're dressed to go to a picnic.
It's a
or-
schlump.
No,
You dress
no.
like a schlump.
Well, I wanna get it. Now, there are certain exceptions to this rule. If you're in a very humid and very warm tropical climate, and you're in Arizona, and it's 115 degrees, and of course, you're gonna schwitz away bullets, you're gonna come there, you can't breathe, so of course. Under certain circumstances, you use licenses where, I can tell you, my brother lives in California, in the Valley, and they have the opposite problem on Sukkot that we have. Sometimes we were dealing with snow already or frigid temperatures. They got triple degree temperature. And the rabbis have ruled that you just only have to go into the sukkah for the kiddush. But at 110, 115 degrees, you don't have to sit in the sukkah. Now, people that want to be very diligent, cut a little hole in the panel, and they invest in a portable air conditioner. What I'm saying is, under a normal circumstance, where Shabbat shouldn't be made to be trivialized. There's sometimes with the lines blurred where we talk about something being, it's a day of rest, and you pull back, and you're supposed to be in a relaxed mode. Relaxed mode is you still have to come to minyan, rest accordingly. And on that note, we're going to transition from Shabbat and festival to weekday. Want us to understand that when you're engaging in, for example, the Amidah, you take 3 steps back and 3 steps forward, you're entering into God's embrace. You're talking to, as we say in Aleinu, you are the King of Kings. To come there, like as I said, you're going to somebody's barbecue, you have to dress accordingly. I'm not saying you have to wear a suit to weekday minyan. But some people I know in someone, let's say in the Orthodox circle, they have like a davening jacket. They wear it just for davening, just to the side. I actually knew a
Excuse
rabbi.
me, a black davening jacket.
Yeah,
It was a black davening jacket where you buttoned the button behind your back so that the arm could fit on the tefillin.
well, I was gonna say that the rabbi I knew in Florida actually went one step further. And he had a zipper all the way up his arm. He wouldn't have to take off his jacket. And he would pull up the zipper so he could put his tefillin on. But there is a davening jacket, but the mindset should be is that when you are praying, I think one of the misnomers where I'm about to enter into this next discussion is the laws of modesty do not only apply to women. Modesty applies to men also, which is a misnomer. We're so worried. Sheila made a statement before about the bat mitzvah girls, which is true. And why we used to have those, I remember Vic would be running back and forth, and some of the ushers that we used to have, and I'm sure David's doing that quite a bit, where somebody comes up to the Torah and you got to rush and give him a shawl, not a talit, something to cover the shoulders. But the truth be told, a lot of people don't know better. Even though they don't read the bar bat mitzvah in packets ahead of time, which Shirley used to put together for bar mitzvah families. And you'd see that there is a dress code. And some people don't know that. So we have to find a fine balance where we don't scare people away. But understand that there is a modum of respect in the sanctuary, you're praying. And it's not just business as usual. Now, the truth be told, my dry cleaner, which I go to in Mayfield, told me that more and more the dry cleaners have gone out of business because more and more people are dressing casual now. And less people are dressing up anymore, and they can make a go of it. So we have to find, I'm saying, use common sense, use just a middle ground. Of course, if it's a super hot day, of course, you can dress accordingly. But I'm just saying in general, that Shabbat shouldn't be treated as this casual, because you're relaxing. We're supposed to be in a relaxed state of mind, that you should approach it as such. Now, actually, there are laws as how you should dress in the morning. I'm not even gonna tell you what you're wearing. I'm gonna tell you what the rabbis say, how you should do it. So, when you get up in the morning, you're supposed to favor the right side of your body. And the right is Kabbalistically the sign of kindness. So you put your right foot in your pants, with your left foot in your pants. Right shoe, right sock, left sock. Same thing with your jackets, because right is favored in terms of also the strength, sign of strength. And we see this from none other than Jacob. When Jacob goes to bless his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, if you remember, right before he's getting close to pass away, Joseph puts the eldest toward his right hand and the youngest on his left. And he does one of these. He takes his right hand and he puts it on the youngest head and the left hand, and Joseph tries to switch his hands. He thinks he's having a senile moment. And he said, I know exactly what I'm doing, but I've seen through the power of prophecy that the younger is going to be greater than the older. So there are a number of things you do that favor the right side. Just for example, when you hang a mezuzah, that's, by the way, just a plug for next week's class. We're all going to be all about mezuzah next week, okay? When you hang a mezuzah, it goes on the right side of the doorpost. When you cover your eyes, when you say Shema, you're supposed to use your right hand. When you wash your hands for Hamotzi, you're supposed to start off with the right and then to the left. Blowing shofar. This is Mr. Goodstein's expertise there. Shofar should not be blown in the middle of your mouth, it should be blown to the side. And the sages tell us, right side. Carrying the Torah. Now,
However, if it sounds better on the left, you blow it on the left.
I disagree with you.
But he's gonna pull out the shulchan. He's gonna start.
it often happens, like your senior rabbi, who is a left-hander. And Shirley, and Josh Foster, and a number of other people. So they put the shoulder onto the right. Same thing with phylacteries. There's a reason why you put the tefillin on your left side, because in accordance with the heart. There's a host of other things you do, some of the customs left side. But for those of you that are left-handed, I don't want you to feel too badly.
I hate to stop you again.
Well, then
There's
don't
a whole
stop.
question I have about left-handed tefillin. We have a senior rabbi in the congregation who wears his tefillin on his right arm. We have had discussions many times over which arm is appropriate. I am left-handed. When I was bar mitzvahed, you know what I was told? I was told, too bad, deal with it. You wear your tefillin on that arm because that is the arm that God said you wear your tefillin on. There were no questions. There was nothing called the left-handed set of tefillin. That's how it was done. So when all of a sudden did we get left-handed tefillin?
Well, that rabbi, I think, not to speak out of school, I think was extremely rigid, to say the least. The halacha state, you put tefillin on your least dominant hand. That's what the halacha says. So that rabbi may have been taking it a little bit too far. But that being said, we do accommodate, and if somebody is left-handed, the question becomes if somebody's ambidextrous.
Yeah.
Right, so then it's like usually even people that are ambidextrous still favor a hand at the right. They may throw with both hands, they may swing from both sides of the plate on golf or baseball, but somebody usually favors one side with riding, so we go with the opposite hand. Now, in regards to removing the clothes, this is what I was gonna say. I'm gonna throw the left is a little bit of a bow now. You start on the left side first. Okay? So you do the reverse. It's the same idea as tefillin. You reverse the process, like go forward, so you reverse, okay? Now, the reason why you do the left side first is not to show impartiality and not offend anyone. Because the right side is the hand of strength and kindness, we want to keep it closed for longer. So you start on the left side first. Kabbalistically, as I mentioned, it represents kindness. But there are other occasions where the left is we do things. Now I want to go back to Joseph. Joseph's garment was known in Hebrew as ketonet, pasim. Pasim in Hebrew, we got a grammarian, strips, but also many colors, right? Now, if you take pasim, there is a belief that Joseph was not sold one time, he was sold up to 4 times. So the pay stands for where he actually ending up with Potiphar. The Samach was Sophrim, which are buyers. The Yud is Yishmaelim, and the Mem is Midianites. Now, once Joseph ends up in Egypt, there's a fascinating story that takes place regarding clothing. So Joseph ends up being bought by Potiphar, and his house immediately sees blessing as soon as Joseph comes into it. The very known thing about righteous people that bring blessings into a city, and when they leave, some of the blessing goes out. And we're told that Joseph was like his mother, an extremely good-looking man. His mom was a beautiful woman, Rachel, and he was extremely good-looking man. And Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him whenever she could, and he wouldn't bat an eye. It happened one day a year that they would have a celebration in Egypt when the Nile River would crest. And all of the water would go into irrigating the fields and allow for all of the crops to grow. So the entire household went to celebrate at the Nile River. She feigns that she's sick, and she said, today I'm going to get him once and for all. And we're told that he changed his outfits Talmud says in the morning and in the night, in the day, and makeup, and it's not getting anywhere. So finally she confronts him. Now he was a young man, lonely, he was an attractive woman. She gives him all kind of assurances nobody will know. And he's ready to give in to his impulses. And the rabbis tell us at the last minute, a picture of his father, he visualizes a picture of Jacob. And that took him out of his mood immediately, if you can imagine. I'll leave it at that. Now, she goes to grab him and he goes to run away. And she grabs him and she tears his clothing. And he runs out of the house. Now she tries to preempt what actually happened. So she brings whoever's around, some of the servants that didn't go down, and basically twists the whole story and distorts that this young man, can you believe what he did? Try to rape me, but I fought him off. Potiphar comes back from the celebration and he hears about it, but he knows Joseph to be trusted and is a little suspect of his wife. So they take the garment and they go to the priests and they do some analysis. The analysis is that it all depends where the garment is torn. If the garment is torn from the front, it's a clear indication that yes, that's what happened. If his garment is torn from behind, that's a sign
That he was
that he
right.
tried to flee. And they told him very clear the garment is torn from behind. Now, Potiphar is in a dilemma. Because he can't go publicly and say, well, my wife's a liar, I'm gonna keep the guy working for me as business as usual. So he does the only thing he can do, which is
Tears.
has him put in jail. Because when you think about it, if you owned a servant and somebody actually try to make a move on your wife, you kill them immediately. You were very well, they could buy another one. The fact that he didn't kill him was an indication. Interesting to note, years later, Joseph ends up marrying their daughter. So you can imagine that conversation around Thanksgiving. That his mother-in-law, right? I'm being a little facetious. But he ended up marrying, and actually the rabbis tell us it was actually his niece. Because in the Torah, an uncle is allowed to marry a niece. It's not considered incestuous. Joseph's sister Dinah was raped by Shem. And she had a child with him, and they didn't, of course, want to keep the child. So the child ended up in Egypt, out of all places, in Potiphar's house, and Joseph ends up marrying. And those are the two children that come. But that being said, very interesting to note in terms of the tearing clothing. Now we see this a number of places with clothing and stories. We have to go to now King Saul. King Saul was given a commandment to eliminate the Amalekites, our arch enemy, once and for all. And basically what that entailed was to kill, it's a little bit hard to hear this, everyone, women, children, the men, and even their animal. Samuel was his prophet and teacher, and it was very explicit. You can't leave any of them. They have to be destroyed. So they go to war, and unfortunately, he lets the king live, and he allows the animals to live. Now, I cannot tell you how it is, because I can't imagine what the king was thinking after his whole nation is wiped out. But somehow, way, shape, or form, that night impregnates a woman, and Amalek lives. They're allowed to, Amalek, the tribe continues. Samuel is engaged by God and says, I want to tell you that your student has not followed my word, and as a result, the kingship is going to be torn from him. And he's very upset. He goes to greet Saul the next day, and Saul's feeling pretty good. That he's destroyed Amalek as we know it, besides the king. And Samuel says, what's that I hear in the background? I hear animals bleating. I can hear the sheep. What have you done? He says, what do you mean I've done? I've killed them, and it's going on and on. He's not taking ownership. That he's violated the commandment. And Samuel tells him point blank, you've lost your kingship. Someone will take it over. and I cannot go back with you to see the people. He wanted him to come with him to make a grand entrance for the lead prophet of the century. And he begs him, and Samuel goes to walk away, and he pulls on his garment and tears it. He does go with him to show one last respect to the king, because he still was king. And the very first thing Samuel does, he does what Saul should have done: bring me the king. And I won't get graphic, but he tears him to pieces. He does what should have been done, but at that point in time, he's lost his kingship. Another story with Saul is because he's losing his kingship, Samuel was only 52. He was his teacher. God didn't want him to suffer, because we're told parents, the same way a child has an affinity for a parent, the parents bring a child into this world, and a rabbi, a teacher, brings a child into the next world for the Torah that they teach them. He didn't want Samuel to see him to suffer and losing the kingship, so Samuel died before him, only at age 52. Saul was obsessed with killing King David, as you know. He was a threat. King David was a threat. Saul wanted his son Jonathan to retain the monarchy after him, but that wasn't God's plan. And he tried to kill King David a number of times. And including when David found refuge in the city of Nob, the high priests, the Kohanim, Saul was so outraged that they would extend a hand to King David, he wiped out the entire city. Now, you should know that in that city, they had what was called the breastplate, like we put on the Torah, but this had stones on there. And on the breastplate, when you wanted to know something futuristically, you can go to Robin and Gabriel, I'll give you some good diamonds. But the breastplate, the stones would light up and would give you an indication to answer your questions. Now there was nobody to go for a breastplate because there was no Kohanim. Samuel was dead. Philistines are about to attack and he doesn't know what he should do. So he's really desperate and he does something which is against the Torah laws. He outlawed any witchcraft, any witches to live in his city, country. So he pulls somebody aside, because you know there's always going to be one. Do you know of one witch? There actually is one. So she tells him where she's living, and he takes off his royal garb and he goes as a simpleton. And he comes to her, and she's very nervous because she knows she can be put to death for practicing witchcraft. And he reassures it's okay. And he tells her, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pull up my master. I want you to pull up Samuel for me. And she does. I can't tell you how she did it, but she did. Now, what would happen is that the picture of the individual would come right side up. In this case, because it was Saul and he was a king, it was upside down. And she realized that she's in the company of somebody special, which is Saul, who's the king, and she gets really freaked out. And he reassures her that nothing's going to happen to her. And then he asked Samuel. This is one of the few cases ever where someone prophesies after they were dead. I don't know what to do. Samuel was very upset because he thought God was beckoning him for his day of judgment. He didn't know who was calling him. And he tells him, the only way that you can make penitence for anything that you have done is you have to go to war, and you will die, and so will your sons die. And that's exactly what happened. He went to war, and he died. Now, one last story was interesting story with Saul, is that King David obviously knew that he was already anointed by Samuel to be the king, but he still had to show respect to Saul. And he's running from him constantly. And one of those times that he was running, he finds a cave. When he was a young man and he was a shepherd, he asked God, why is there such a thing as a spider? And God said, I'll show you one day when you're an adult. He goes and he hides in this cave, and a miracle happens. The spider starts immediately spinning a web. And it spins a web at the entrance of the cave, and Saul walks right by it, knowing there's no way somebody could have come in because the web would have been broken. We're told that when he's walking by, David cuts a piece of his robe off. And he presents it to him and said, you know, I could have killed you. I'm not a threat to you. And he looks at him and his understanding and he appreciates it. Now, fast forwarding, the Haftorah for Chayei Sarah speaks all about this. Melech David Zaken, when Saul was an old man, when David was an older man, age 70, he couldn't get warm. Says, "Velo yichamlo," all the blankets in the world, to even try to give him a woman, not for intimacy, just to cuddle up against him. He, by the way, didn't violate the commandment like his son did. He only had, I should say only had, but how many wives is a king allowed?
Many.
How many?
1,000.
1,000? I don't think so.
No,
18 wives. He already had his 18 wives, but he couldn't become warm. Couldn't warm. And the rabbis say one of the reasons why he couldn't get his body temperature regulated, because of that incident in the cave where he cut Saul's garment, that he did it to royalty. So the garments have to be treated in accordance with proper respect. Not too long ago, it feels like 6 months ago, but we just read about the story of Purim. And one of the ways Mordechai is honored. Anyone? Maybe you even read it.
Garment.
What's that?
You wore the
Just like
king's
a
garment.
prince.
That's right, the king's garment. They put him in this regalia. They let him walk in the main streets. They honored him to show. Now, the word beged, remember I started the class? Beged is what's used in the third paragraph of the Shema. Yom Hashem Moshe Lemor Haber El Bnei Yisrael Matahem Asulahem Tzitzit Akafeh big day hem clothing. So tzitzit is also, and the talit is referred to as a beged, a piece of clothing. And therefore, anything that has four corners, we're told, requires the fringes. I don't want to get too technical because we're running out of time. But on the corners of the beged, there are knots. It's a combination of 7, 8, 11, and 13 of each of the four corners with a double knot. We're told that you should have, if you can, chilazon, which is that blue fish, the mollusk, which we speak about in the third paragraph of the Shema. But I just wanted to highlight that the actual Shema speaks about beged, which is clothing. Now, one of the greatest sins a person can ever commit is a public desecration of God's name. Therefore, it says in the Talmud, if somebody knows that he's about to sin, he should go and change his clothes. Yubash shachorim, change it into a different outfit and leave the city. So people should not tie in the city that you're in, and you shouldn't make a desecration of God's name. By no means are they suggesting it's okay to sin, but it's not okay to desecrate God's name because that's absolutely unacceptable. If you go to the very religious section in Israel, Mea Sharim, I'm sure some of you have been there, you'll note that the Hasidim have their own special garments. Not everyone wears all black. Some have stripes, some have white and blue and green, and they have their own interesting, depending what sect of Hasidism. Now, going back to the prayer that I want to wrap up because we're running out of time. The Hasidic have a custom before prayer, they take a little belt, it's called a gartel, and they tie it around the waist. It's like a little belt, and make a knot on the side. And the reason for that is that you're supposed to separate the extremities from the upper and the lower. The lower part of the body, obviously, is used for your bodily functions and for production. Now we're focusing on the upper part, which is the holiness of God. So the Hasidic Jews wear these. Mainstream Orthodoxies don't have a problem with that because they maintain the elasticity of your undergarments or your belt that you wear.
It's the same.
Is the same. And last but not least, I want to just finish up with Elijah. Elijah had a special garment that he wore. He had a special cloak. His cloak was made from leather. And he also wore a belt. He didn't want to have anything that benefited him from this world. And when he turns over the lead prophecy, basically Elijah went too far. He was too critical of the Jews. And God essentially says to him, your time has come. You're just too harsh on my people. So he takes his number one student, which is Elisha. And he tells him, if you're able to witness me leaving this world, I'll give you a blessing. And he stays with him all the way to the end. And he says, I want to have double what you had. So in other words, all the miracles that you had, I should have double. So we're told that he sees a very famous story with a chariot of horses and fire coming down from heaven that scoops him up, takes Elijah straight to heaven, and he leaves the cape behind. That cape, Elijah just used a few minutes before to split the Jordan River. He hit it with his cape. And now Elijah wants to test if the blessing has come to fruition. So now that he's on the other side of the boundary, the first thing he does is he takes the cape and he hits the river and it splits. And he goes through. All of the people on the other side see that he's got Elijah's cloak. They understand the mantle has been passed. And he wears the mantle for the rest of his days. Needless to say, there's much to discuss all about clothing and different covers and things of that nature, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the stories in the Torah, some of the laws in the Torah, just to kind of give you a little perspective that Judaism has an opinion, as you know, on everything. Not everybody agrees with it, but everything, there's an opinion about anything and everything. Yeah.
What's your opinion if Eve didn't take a bite of that apple, forbidden apple? We'll all be walking without clothes.
If Eve didn't eat the fruit, no, we are not going to go with the apple. But according to mainstream discussions, God didn't intend to bring death into the world. So if to answer your hypothetical, everyone would know every relative that they ever had. Not to mention, there will be more Jews probably in the world now than from nations collectively. But unfortunately, they brought death into the world. And the only way that's ever going to be really corrected is when the Messiah comes. And we've got another chance when God will take away the evil inclination. On that note, we are going to be doing a mezuzah next week. Interesting discussion about all the laws of mezuzah, some antidotes, some interesting stories. And come back. Have a good evening, everyone.